Hi friends, it's Tilly, and I'm so excited to be making a single layer corset today. This corset is going to be super cost effective and supportive, perfect for holding up my steel Tinkerbell wings at Comic-Con. But don't worry, this same method can be used for any shape corset. So let's get started. I'll put a list of materials down in the description below, none of which are sponsored. You'll need a corset pattern, steel boning, both flats and spirals. I got mine from Wawak for only about $10. I also used bra cups, but those are optional. I got mine from Wawak for about $4. Grommets I had on hand, but they are only about $1 at most fabric stores. You'll need thread, interfacing, and corset laces. And last, I'm using the base of duck canvas, and I got mine 50% off at the remnant section at Joann's, so it was only a few dollars. But I know what you might be thinking. Duck canvas for a corset, isn't that risky? Well, yes, but I'm going to give it a try and hope it doesn't stretch out too much. I'm gonna be your guinea pig and we'll see if it survives at Comic-Con. So subscribe to find out, and if you don't want to risk it, you can use Coutil. For the pattern and design, I'm patterning the corset off of my Tinkerbell dress, so it'll be the perfect undergarment for my wings. I'm using the seams for my boning channels to make this super easy, and I'm lacing it in the front so I can get in and out of it by myself, which I find important. Let's review the plan with my corset pattern, but this method could be done with pretty much any corset pattern. Here's the half pattern that will be mirrored for the other side. From left to right, I have center back, side front, and center front. Your corset could have more or less seams. Let's review center front first. I have a 2-inch seam allowance at center front. This will be folded over to create 2 boning channels, one at the very edge of the corset, and then the grommets will be placed just inside of that bone at about 3/4 of an inch gap. Then the second bone will be placed. The top, bottom, and side will all have a 5/8 inch seam allowance. For the side front piece, all seams will have a 5/8 inch seam allowance except for the side seam at 1 inch. I did this just in case I needed to make any adjustments in the fit. For the princess seams here, both sides of the seam allowance will be ironed towards the side seam to make 1 boning channel. This will be a spiral bone due to the curve in the corset and to maintain the curve in the bust. The side seam here will be opened flat and have 1 bone on each side. The rest of the seam allowance for the side back will be at 5/8 of an inch. The back princess seam will be the same as the front princess seam. Iron both sides of the seam allowance towards the side seam and create 1 boning channel. Center back is similar to center front. Use 5/8 of an inch seam allowance except for center back. That seam allowance will also be 2 inches and will make 2 boning channels. One directly at center back and the next at the edge of the seam allowance. With the plan in place, let's review how we're going to make the channels. Here I will demonstrate with center back. I already have the seams stitched together and ironed. Next, to create the channel, I will line up my presser foot at the edge of the seam. This will help make sure that my channels are parallel. I then move my needle all the way to the other side of the seam. This will make sure my 1/4 inch bones fit well. Once the channels are done, we can do a single turned hem at the bottom before putting the bones inside and closing the top of the corset. This will create the top and bottom of your boning channels. Let's move on to the construction. Cut out your pattern pieces out of your fabric and serge all the edges. To try to minimize the stretch of the duck canvas, I stay stitched just outside of the stitch lines of each piece. Iron on the interfacing to the center front where the grommets will be. I also put in interfacing at center back before I decided to only make an opening at the front of the corset. The pieces can be stitched in any order. For this tutorial, first stitch together the princess seams at the front. And iron both seam allowances towards the side seam. You'll next stitch down the boning channel by following the seam with your presser foot to create a straight line. Make sure that the bones fit in the channel and are not too wide. Repeat this step for the princess seam in the back. First, stitch the seam. Press both sides of the seam allowance towards the side seam. Then stitch down the seam allowance to create the boning channel. For the princess seams, you may need to manipulate the fabric a bit to have it lay flat in the machine. I originally thought I might not need boning in the side seams, but I was getting some pulls on the corset here, so we will do the same steps for the side seam. Stitch the seam. And iron the side seams flat and create 2 boning channels. Repeat this step for the center back seam. Measure the bones for each channel and make sure they aren't too long. You want a little bit of space so that they don't tear through the corset. Next, hem the bottom of the corset and place all the bones inside. Use spiral bones at the front princess seams for the curves and flat bones for the straight seams. You can then close up the top of the corset. Be very careful in this step to not hit any bones. Feel free to skip over the boning channels and hand stitch down instead. Due to my pattern shape, I had to do a few extra steps. At center front, I had to close the top of a few shorter boning channels. Second, due to the curve from the bust to underarm, I had to clip into the seam allowance to lay flat. So I'm going to clip it and use a bit of fray block to prevent unraveling. I've also never seen fray block stain a fabric before, and I hope this comes out in the wash, otherwise I just have like weird little blemishes on my corset. Next, finish the top and bottom seam of the modesty panel and stitch it in carefully from the top side to avoid hitting a bone. Finally, I used a grommet machine to add the grommets. If your pattern doesn't call for it, I would highly recommend making sure you place a bone on both sides of your grommets so that they don't pull on the fabric and rip out. You can also put in parallel lines of stitching where the grommets will be placed for additional support, because there's nothing worse than spending all this time creating a corset and then having the grommets rip out on you. And with that final grommet in place, your corset is complete. You're now ready to flutter around Comic-Con like a confident Tinkerbell. Or you now have a new corset. I hope you enjoyed this single layer corset tutorial. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. I'll see you next time.